Hi, everyone. Welcome to Healthy Living with Dr. EE. This is our first session for 2022. Hope you are all feeling eager and ready to learn. We are so excited to bring you many interesting and relevant health topics this year, so do share this event with your family and friends and ask them to tune in too. Now, before we begin the event, please be reminded that the content is copyrighted. No recording is allowed. Let us all welcome our special guest for today, Dr. Yi Zhang.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your Saturday morning to listen to my talk. Now, we've had a long break, and this is our first session of the year, but I hope that you're all as excited as I am to have another session to go through.
Dr. Yi, people have a lot of questions about the pandemic, about viruses, about bacteria, and other similar topics. So instead of me asking you why this and why that, let's do this topic in one go.
All right, so because this is our first session of the year, we have a lot of questions just built up. So we're hopefully going to hit a lot of the common questions that we've been getting all in one go. So firstly, I want to say that our data and information might change in the future as we continue to learn more about our ever-changing situation. So just keep in mind that everything now is just what we know at this moment in time. In the future, as more information comes out, as more data comes out, all of this might change. So firstly, let's start with our very first question. Why are viruses so hard to kill? Now, part of this reason is that viruses are really small. It goes like this if you had to rank it from biggest to smallest. A human cell, we already know that human cells are really small, but compared to bacteria and viruses, human cells are giants. So it goes human cell, and then bacteria, and then virus. Now, even though in pictures like this, they look very similar in size, but that's just for convenience sake, okay? Just to show you what it's like. In reality, the size difference is pretty massive. Take, for example, a red blood cell, just the blood cells that run around in your body and your blood. They're about 7,500 to 8,700 nanometers in diameter. A streptococcus bacteria, a pretty common one, is about 600 to 1,000 nanometers. A virus like the SARS-CoV-2 is about 80 to 120 nanometers. So obviously different bacteria and different viruses will be different sizes, but the difference between them is still pretty massive. It's like comparing the size of a human being to the size of a multi-story building. So why are viruses so hard to kill? Well, firstly, yeah, viruses are tiny, but it's not only the size, but rather viruses also work in a really weird way. Viruses are not really alive. If I had a petri dish and it had bacteria on it, I gave it all sorts of nutrients, I gave it warmth, I made sure I had a really nice environment to live in, the bacteria would live on and happily replicate. But if I had a petri dish with viruses on it, the same one, I gave it the same nutrients, everything, nothing would happen. The viruses wouldn't grow, they wouldn't replicate. This is because viruses lack the basic machinery it needs to make copies on its own. So on the simplest level, a virus is a package of genetic material in a protein shell. That's pretty much it. They don't have any metabolic processes. They don't have any of that inner machinery that other living cells would have. Thus, viruses aren't really alive. So then how does it work? How does something that's not alive infect us and replicate and cause disease? Now, the primary goal of a virus is to replicate. The destruction and mayhem is just a side effect. So in order to replicate, a virus has to have access to a host, like the human body and the human cells. Once it's managed to get into the body, then it starts sort of hijacking the cells. Since the virus doesn't have the necessary machinery to make copies of itself, what it does is that it goes in, it takes over the cell, and then it uses the cell's machinery to churn out copies of the virus instead. So viruses can be super savvy and they create conditions that allow them to spread more, to infect more, and therefore to replicate more. For example, the flu virus can cause people to produce more mucus and sneeze, and therefore spreading it around more so it can find more people and replicate more. A cell infected by a virus no longer performs its normal functions. So, for example, if I had a lung cell that was infected by a virus, that lung cell isn't going to work normally again. It's not going to contribute to the lung's normal functions. What happens then is that the cell will just start churning out copies of the virus instead. And then the thing is that how viruses are released is that the new virus will go in, it sort of links up with the cell. It puts in all of the instructions for making copies of itself. And then the cell starts making copies and copies and copies and copies. And eventually the cell bursts open and the viruses just come out of the cell. It's a bit like that Alien movie, just coming out of the cell. But what happens then is that if a lot of cells end up being infected, that means that there's a lot of cells that are not doing its normal job, not contributing to the human body. And it also means that a lot of cells will end up dying as they churn out these copies and then start, pushing out all of these copies and just bursting and replicating. But the best thing about our immune system is that it has a built-in way to detect viruses even after it's entered our body's own cell. The virus can detect which cells have been invaded by viruses and get rid of them. And it's harder for scientists to do the same. Now, we have antibiotics for bacteria, right? If you have antibiotics, you're killing the bacteria just fine. The bacteria haven't entered into a human cell. They're just sort of there. They're among the human cells. They're stealing our nutrients. They're replicating that way. So you don't need to be able to distinguish between, a cell that is normal and a cell that's infected. All you need to do is be able to distinguish between a human cell and bacteria. And that's actually pretty easy because bacteria are very, very different from human cells. For example, if you have the antibiotics, you can target the metabolic processes of a bacteria, which are different from a human cell. You can target the cell wall of a bacteria because, human cells, they don't have cell walls. So that's an easy target. There's all sorts of things you can target in bacteria. But for viruses, it's a lot more difficult. Viruses, they don't have a metabolic process, so you can't target that. And viruses sort of, they sneakily use the body's own cells to replicate. And that can make it super difficult to be able to target the virus without harming our normal human cells in the process. So why don't bacteria kill viruses? Now, antibiotics kill bacteria, like I mentioned before, by targeting certain targets on the bacteria that you only find on bacteria. So antibiotics are only needed for certain infections caused by bacteria. They are 100% absolutely, completely useless for viral infections. So you should never be taking antibiotics if you have a viral infection because all that does is expose you to side effects from the antibiotics and it doesn't help you at all because it's not going to target the viruses. It's not going to kill the viruses. It's going to do absolutely nothing to the virus. That's because bacteria and viruses, they're not even remotely similar structure-wise. So antibiotics have no effect. They don't even share even any of the inner workings. So instead of antibiotics for viruses, remember it's antibiotics for bacteria. And then for viruses, we want antivirals. Antivirals are to viruses what antibiotics are to bacteria. Now, antivirals, they usually work by stopping the virus from replicating or trying to stop the virus from entering the cell to begin with. Now, antibiotics take advantage of the difference between the bacteria and the human cell. And because there's so many common differences between bacteria and human cells, you can have all sorts of wide, broad spectrum antibiotics, which will affect more than one type of bacteria. But for antivirals, it's a lot more difficult to have an antiviral that has a broad spectrum action. That's because viruses, they're very different from bacteria, but they're also very, very different from each other. Now, there's a huge diversity between the different types of viruses. That means that it's really, really difficult for the antiviral to have a broad spectrum action. For example, for the coronavirus that we have now, we have antivirals and you can target, certain parts of the virus. Now, a common target of antivirals is to target the portion of the virus that sort of lets it enter the cell. So you can think of it as a virus coming along, and you can think of it like it has a pickaxe. It has a pickaxe to try to pick open the cell to enter into the cell. So what an antiviral might do then is to, take away the pickaxe. If you take away the pickaxe, then the virus won't have a way to enter the cell. If it can't enter the cell, then it can't replicate. And if it can't replicate, then it can't cause a lot of the problems that we're looking at. But you might see, oh, this type of virus has a pickaxe. So we can take away the pickaxe. But another type of virus, they might have an axe instead to get into the cell, or they might have a hammer. So you can say, okay, take away all of the pickaxes. So you only take away the pickaxes, but then you leave alone the viruses that have a hammer or an axe instead. So, it's a very specific sort of action. The next thing you have to remember about antivirals is that antivirals work best super early on in the infection. And for a lot of viral diseases, by the time you show symptoms, it might be already a little bit too late to take an antiviral. So at best, antivirals will ease symptoms and they shorten the length of the illness. So why do you need to take antivirals super early on in the illness? It's because super early on, you don't have that many viruses to deal with. So for example, if you're trying to confiscate pickaxes, you can think, oh, I can take away 50 pickaxes. But then if you turn that into 500 or 5,000, it's a lot more difficult, right? So antivirals work best when you take them super early on in the disease process. But you have to remember is that even though you're taking all of these medications, antibiotics, antivirals, they're not a cure-all. All they do is that they help support your immune system. So your immune system is still the bulk of the army trying to tear down the enemy. And all of these drugs, the antibiotics, the antivirals, they're the support, showing up to support your main army. If you didn't have your main army and you only had your support forces, well, that's not going to do very much against the enemy at all. So you have to take care of the immune system. In the end, the immune system still does the bulk of the work, clearing out the virus. All of these drugs, they do a lot to help, but they are not the end all. Now, why are mice and rats commonly used for research? Just 2.5% of DNA turns mice into men. Mice share about 97.5% of their working DNA with humans. So genetically, we're pretty close, making them good candidates for research involving genetics or human diseases. Mice also develop in the same way from egg and sperm, so we can roughly use that to see how something would affect humans. We have the same kinds of organs and systems. For example, we have a heart, brain, lungs, kidney, similar circulatory system, digestive, hormonal, nervous, etc. So just, this one's pretty obvious, but if you're trying to study how a disease affects a certain organ and the animal doesn't have that certain organ, it makes it pretty hard to do research, right? So because they have the same organs, it's a good representative of our organs. Next up is that they have a short lifespan, which means that we can see the effects of aging rather quickly. And they also multiply quickly, which means that you can get a lot of mice to work with, and it also means that we can see the effects of certain diseases or certain variables across several generations. So why do bats harbor more viruses than other animals? So it's not only bats, it's also birds. Bats and birds are both natural animal reservoirs of many zoonoses. Zoonosis is an infectious disease that is passed from animals to humans or from humans to animals. Part of this is because bats live in a wide variety of geographical areas and they have super diverse populations. Now, there's over 1,400 different bat species spread to pretty much every corner of the world. Now, bats are also social creatures. They live together and they live in large population in close quarters, meaning that diseases can easily spread among them. Their ability to fly also means that they can cover vast distances as well, which means that it's super easy for them to pick up and transmit different diseases. Now, bats in particular stand out among all of the animal reservoirs. They're known for carrying diseases fatal to humans or other animals, such as rabies or even the Ebola virus, all without getting sick, all thanks to their immune system. They live happily together with the virus. Scientists are still trying to figure out what makes their immune system so special. So far, researchers have discovered that the immune system in bats can inhibit viral replication, inhibit inflammation, and prevent inappropriate immune responses like the cytokine storm that would kill them. Bats also have a long lifespan, about 20 to 40 years. So, why won't eradicating bats, protect people against COVID-19 or other viral diseases? Now, since the rise of new diseases like the coronavirus, public opinion has turned against bats. Like snakes or spiders, many people have this irrational fear of bats. Now, I sort of get it because I have an irrational fear of spiders, but that doesn't mean that we have to go around and kill all of the spiders in the world. We have to remember is that, bats, they shouldn't be cold. On the contrary, humans should be protecting bats. Eradicating bats aren't going to eradicate the virus. Bats are not the sole animal reservoir. The virus will just infect other species and live on that way. Other animals will become the main reservoir for the viruses instead. And if we keep interfering, if we keep forcing contact with these wild animals, with the viruses, it might even jump across more species and it might just end up in humans even more. So, we have to remember is that bats, they also contribute to our ecological systems. So why eradicating bats will destroy our habitats and disrupt our ecological systems is because bats are a keystone species, meaning that they help hold up entire ecosystems together. Now, we need bats. Bats serve as a pollinator and help with seed dispersal. Some plants, such as some species of cacti, depend entirely on bats for pollination. Bats are pollinators for more than 300 species of fruits. Now, without bats, we likely wouldn't have durians, mangoes, bananas, avocados, some nuts, figs, chocolate, etc., since those plants, they depend heavily on bats for pollination. Bats also play a super important role as pest control. A small-sized bat, just a small one, can eat more than 1,000 mosquito-sized insects in one night. They will eat literally tons of insects. In the United States, it's estimated that just by eating insects, bats reduce the pesticide bill of the agriculture industry by $3.7 billion to as much as $53 billion a year. If bats were gone, farmers would have to rely on much more pesticides to help control the pest population. Now, bats also help pollinate flowers, plants, and forest trees. Around 80 medications come from plants that rely on bats for their survival. Now, further understanding into how bats can control viruses inside their body may also let researchers develop new ways and new therapeutic agents to help fight disease in humans and in other animals. So bats, they do so much good for us. And these creatures of the night, they should be loved and not feared. So why is increased contact with animals likely to cause new outbreaks? So you might have heard that, all of these new diseases popping up, they always seem to be coming from animals. Scientists estimate that about 60% of pathogens affecting humans will come from animals. So zoonosis is a really common way for how all of these diseases can be spread from animals to humans or even from humans to animals. So we can come into contact with these diseases in a variety of ways. For example, we can come into contact with it by handling sick animals through animal bites, through vectors. Vectors are sort of like the middleman. Like they will pick up disease from one organism and then sort of carry it to another organism. A common vector is mosquitoes. So mosquitoes can pick up diseases from one animal and give it to someone else. So we can also pick up these diseases through consuming contaminated meat, milk, or even through consuming contaminated water. So the closer the contact between humans and animals, the greater the risk. But the majority of these zoonotic diseases originate from wildlife, not in farmed animals. This is simply because in the wild, there's much more diversity, so the number of pathogens is higher. Now, diseases have always been present in animals and in humans. In the past, those diseases would remain buried in those wild and remote places, allowed to affect the local populations without spilling over by the grace of distance. If humans never come into contact with the disease, you can't catch it. But now that disease is closing. People are carving out parts of the world for themselves that were previously left to the wild animals. For example, through mining, wildlife markets, etc. All of these, they expose people to more wild animals. As humans expand and push into these wildlife-rich territories, the risk of spillover of disease from animals to humans increases. And as the human population swells, the greed for land increases and forests die. This has a devastating consequence on wildlife, the ecosystem, ecological diversity, and even human health. So somewhere out there, there is a dangerous virus brewing in some wild animal, mutating and preparing to make that jump into humans. Now, I say this now, and people think, oh, it's a long shot. People before that thought, that won't happen. This is like something out of a sci-fi movie. But it's already happened, like COVID-19 or even the bird flu before SARS. Nearly every major epidemic that has ever happened has been a zoonotic disease. For example, the 1918 Spanish flu, it came from birds, and it killed as many as 100 million people. That's more than the total number of casualties suffered in World War I. AIDS from chimps has killed more than 40 million people. Ebola came from bats, and it has taken probably more than 11,000 lives. So all of these different viruses out there, they have come from wild animals. So one of the things we do have to keep in mind is to, let the wild animals be. We don't have to keep pushing into their territory. So the best way to avoid all of these diseases is to keep our distance. Let them live their life. We can live ours at a distance. Don't destroy their homes. Don't kill them unnecessarily. Don't eat them. Just leave them in peace. It's when we start encroaching on their spaces that we end up with problems. For example, the Nipah virus outbreak in Malaysia from 1998 to 1999 was the result of humans encroaching into wildlife territory. Due to deforestation and climate change, fruit bats were pushed to leave the forest, and they eventually found new homes in cultivated orchards near pig farms. Now, these bats carried the Nipah virus, which wouldn't have been a problem, if they weren't so close to us, because they don't cause a problem to the bats. So, the bats will do their thing. They go around, they find new territory because we have encroached on their territory. We're the ones who have ruined their homes. So they find more territory and they find out this fruit orchard and they go, you know what, I eat fruits. So, they find this new home, they find this new food source, which we have so conveniently just handed to them. They eat the fruits and they contaminate a lot of things. So they can contaminate the fruits, they can contaminate the food that the pigs eat. All of this can be contaminated by bat excretions. So then pigs will then pick up the virus by eating all of this contaminated foods. Humans will then contract the infection from the pigs. In the end, around 265 people were affected, resulting in 105 deaths. Research estimates that every 160,000 hectares of forest loss is linked to an additional 10,000 cases of malaria. So deforestation is strongly linked to an increased risk of these infectious diseases. Now, 160,000 sounds like a lot. Okay, but it's not a lot, because every year we lose around 6 million hectares of forest. So 160,000, it's a drop in the bucket. Sorry about this. How is global warming forcing the emergence of new diseases? Now, climate change and the warming Earth is demolishing the natural barriers that once protected populations of animals, including humans, from disease. So all of these rising temperatures, they don't just bring dangers from extreme weather events, because, that's all people seem to focus on. They look at global warming and then they think, oh, extreme weather, a warming Earth. They think of those things. But we have to know is that all of these rising temperatures, they also increase the risk of disease spread. A lot of bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites that bring disease, they prefer warmer climates where they can grow and multiply more. Now, winters, they're actually sort of a natural safeguard because they kill a lot of the pathogens. But with shorter winters and with the greenhouse effect, there's more potential for these diseases than ever before to spread. Now, this effect is seen especially in the tropical vector diseases like malaria, the ones that are spread by the middleman like mosquitoes. So what happens then is that the warming Earth starts expanding mosquito habitats, which means that we are more likely to see vector-borne illnesses like Zika, dengue, malaria in places that they were not seeing before. For example, Nepal was previously too cool for dengue fever, but now they suffer from it because of global warming. Although, mosquitoes seem more annoying than anything else, if you look at the sheer number of people they have killed from the diseases they carry, mosquitoes are actually the deadliest animal on Earth. Now, researchers have found a significant increase in diseases caused by vectors like mosquitoes and have noted that this matches changes in the environment like the rising temperatures. Mosquitoes now thrive in places they avoided before, and this warmer weather allows these tropical mosquitoes to spread, to push their boundaries northward, bringing with them dangerous diseases. Now, worldwide cases of dengue have increased 30-fold, and nearly half the world is now at risk from malaria. Researchers estimate that by 2070, the number of people at risk of malaria and dengue fever could increase by up to 4.7 billion people. Other vector-borne diseases like Lyme disease, tick-borne encephalitis, yellow fever, even the plague have increased in both number and geographical range. So a lot of what is contributing to this is just what the activities of humans like deforestation. So how is all of this forcing the emergence of new diseases? Now, another thing we have to remember is that air pollution also contributes. It helps viruses become better airborne and more deadly. A 1 microgram per meter cubed increase in the exposure of particulate pollutants, or PM2.5 particulate matter, is linked to about a 15% increase in COVID-19 deaths. Now, why is PM2.5 such an important number? It's because particles larger than this have a tough time getting past our defenses. But particles smaller than this, they can bypass a lot of our defenses and affect our health quite severely. Right. The melting of ice and permafrost can also lead to the emergence of ancient diseases, just like out of a movie. So there was a case in Siberia, actually, of the anthrax that killed one 12-year-old boy. What happened there is that the permafrost melted and released spores of anthrax into the nearby water and then into the food supply. So a lot of spores, bacteria or viruses, they could be trapped, frozen in the permafrost, especially in places where victims of the infected have died. And when it comes to these diseases, people always think, oh, you have to be there when it melts for you to catch it. That's not the case. You don't have to be around it at all. Humans don't even have to be around the area that is melting in order to suffer from these diseases. Global warming is forcing animals to change their migration patterns from where they used to live to where they now live. So it's possible that animals can come into contact with these released pathogens, just pick it up and then spread it from there. So another really hot question lately is, why haven't we found the intermediate host for COVID-19 yet? Up to date, there is no evidence that proves that bats gave humans COVID-19. We haven't found the SARS-CoV-2 virus in bats. You may have heard news that there were similar viruses found, for example, like 96% similar. But similar doesn't mean the same. There's actually a really big difference. So a 4% difference in genetic material is like 50 years of mutations. So we can say, we found a cousin, but we still haven't found the intermediate host for COVID-19 yet. So in our recent history, we haven't had a pandemic quite like this, where we've had the tools to track it, where we have been infected so widely that we have even found cases in animals too, and a wide variety of animals like cats, deer, fruit bats, ferrets, monkeys, hamsters, dogs, tigers, lions, minks, etc. Given how widely the virus has already spread among people, even if you do find the virus in animals, it doesn't confirm that that animal is the host. They may have been infected by us or even another animal. So at this rate, it may be super difficult to figure out where COVID-19 came from. So why wasn't COVID-19 engineered in a lab? Sure. Humans have been creating new organisms through genetic engineering for years, but that involves inserting genetic sequences into something that's already existing. So our modern technology, it's pretty impressive, but we're not that good, okay? This isn't a sci-fi movie. We're just not that good. Let's break it down. So there's no trace in the SARS-CoV-2 virus to show that it's man-made. Yeah, we can manipulate the genetic material of organism, but it leaves traces behind. that's just a byproduct of how we do it. It just leaves traces behind that will suggest it's been manipulated because you don't see those sequences naturally. Another reason is just out of vanity. People go through the trouble of doing this. They want a signature. They want to know that, this is where I inserted it. They want a little marker so they know. And we can't find any trace in the virus that shows that it's man-made. Secondly, and one of the most important reasons, is that we actually don't know what certain mutations do. Okay, there's this idea floating around that scientists, they know how to manipulate the genome like we're coding something on a computer. We will change this sequence, change another sequence, and we get the result that we want. We're not that good. All right, we don't know what these changes will do to the virus. We don't know what certain mutations will do. Sure, we can change it, but we're not going to know what the change actually results in because we're not that good. So people think that, this virus must be man-made because it's too perfect. It's too perfect to have caused a pandemic. But to get to that stage, if we wanted to get to that stage and we were genetically engineering and creating a virus to do that, what we would have to do is that we would have to change a little bit of thing and then test it, because we don't know what that change would do. So we would change a little bit and then test it. We would have to have a lot of people to test it on. All right, and there's no trace of that. There's no sign of that. Plus, we don't know. We just don't have that knowledge to change the genome to have the result that we want. And currently, you also have to remember is that we don't have the technology to make it from scratch. This is just sort of leapfrogging off the previous idea. We don't have the technology to make a virus from scratch. Okay, we're not good to write all of the virus's genetic material. We're not good enough to write it from scratch. Okay, we don't know what the genome is going to do. We don't know how to create it from scratch. What we can do is that we can take an existing virus and then tweak it, right? But even then, there's no known virus close enough to serve as the starting material for engineering SARS-CoV-2. So, you might also heard that people are saying, oh, the virus has a unique feature, a furin cleavage site, which helps it enter cells. And this is evidence of engineering because SARS-CoV-2 has it, but its cousins don't. Firstly, this is wrong. Many other viruses have a furin cleavage site, like HIV, Ebola, influenzas, etc. It actually happens in a lot of coronaviruses naturally. So, when you're looking at this, it's Occam's razor, or basically when you hear your hoofbeats, look for horses and not zebras. In a way, it can be comforting to think that all of the suffering we've gone through for the last 2 years has been down to some mad scientists trying to screw with the world and release a virus. But in reality, that's not the case. There's no boogeyman to defeat. Nature does what it does, and sometimes it just sucks. Why haven't viruses for other infections been developed yet when a vaccine for COVID-19 was developed so fast? Now, COVID-19 is a special case. The world really, really, really needed a vaccine, and countries were willing to spend money on it. Scientists were willing to drop everything and work on this. Everyone, we devoted all of our resources for this. Now, but for other viruses, there's two main reasons why. In normal cases, vaccines are not developed that fast, okay? So there's two main reasons for it. The first one is shameful, and the second one is more scientific. The main shameful reason is lack of investment and funding. Research into making vaccines is incredibly expensive and it's incredibly time consuming. It can take more than 10 years and $1 billion to develop a single vaccine. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not really much compared to the spending you would see on other things like weapons or the army. So if you look at just the United States, the approved budget for the Department of Defense is in the hundreds of billions. Most companies will spend tens of billions on defense, but only a fraction of that on vaccine development. So while defense spending is funded by the government and by extension taxpayers, a lot of vaccines, they rely on private investors or on beating out, the competition for government grants. So all of this, it's really hard to get the money to fund the way to make a vaccine. So these companies that produce the vaccines, they also tend to focus on the ones that make them money because they spend so much on making these vaccines. So of course, they want to make that money back. So, they make expensive vaccines like the ones for children in rich countries, military vaccines, or vaccines for tourists, or they might focus on vaccines for flashy diseases like the Black Plague or anthrax, because this can get a lot of attention and funding as a side result. Rarer diseases or diseases that tend to occur in poor countries where vaccines are actually needed more than ever, they're sort of out of luck. The people living there, they have to rely on the goodwill of richer countries or on philanthropists. Even though through air travel and globalization, there is not a lot stopping those diseases from spreading around the world. Now, the second reason that vaccines are difficult to develop is that, it's just how viruses are. Now, in order for a vaccine to be useful, it has to be able to trigger long-lasting immunity. That's the entire goal of a vaccine. So as a general rule, if a natural infection, meaning that someone catches the infection naturally and they recover, if that process can trigger immunity in someone, then generally a vaccine is possible. Some diseases like malaria, they never seem to trigger immunity. People will get repeated bouts of malaria, but they might find that, each bout is less bad than the previous one, but that doesn't mean that they get immunity. All right, so, if it doesn't ever trigger immunity, it can be pretty hard for scientists to figure out a way to make a vaccine that will trigger immunity if the natural infection doesn't do it. The other reason is that a lot of viruses will mutate super, super quick. So a vaccine, they tend to target a certain iteration of the virus. But if the virus mutates too quickly, then you're going to need a new vaccine, or you're going to need to be able to develop a vaccine that can keep up with the mutations. But that is super difficult. For example, the flu vaccine is changed every year because the flu virus mutates every year. Now, the immune system is still technically immune against the flu viruses it has encountered before. So, if you get the flu virus every year, you're still immune to the ones that you were vaccinated against. It's just the mutated viruses are just too different from the previous viruses, so the immune system doesn't quite recognize it. And sometimes it can be quite difficult to find an antigen or, that thing that will trigger immunity. Other viruses like HIV, they also mutate super quickly. HIV can mutate as much in a single day as the flu does in the entire year. So by the time you have made a vaccine for, this particular HIV virus, it's already mutated and your vaccine is useless. So, you have to it's that additional hurdle to jump over that can make vaccines really, really difficult to make. Another hurdle to jump over is that lengthy, extensive testing is required to make sure, number one, the vaccine actually works. Number two, the vaccine is safe to use, and this requires more time and even more money. Another thing we want to keep in mind is that for a lot of viruses, people hear hepatitis C and they think, oh, hepatitis C is just one type of virus. Yeah, sort of. Hepatitis C actually has 7 genetically distinct forms with about 60 subtypes. All right, so in order to make an effective vaccine, you don't want to make a vaccine that's only effective against one subtype. Okay, that's not going to be a huge lot of help. You want to develop a vaccine that protects against all of the subtypes for it to be really useful. And this can be super difficult to manage. Now, the next thing is also that there's very limited animal models to study from. You have chimpanzees, which will suffer from diseases similar to human diseases, but then there's also the cost and the ethical considerations to think of. But luckily, we have managed to jump over these hurdles and we have managed to get our COVID-19 vaccine. But another question that is asked quite a lot is, why is there no chance that the mRNA vaccine can cause cancer? Now, there's a lot of reasons why. If you want to mess with a cell's DNA, you have to be able to get into the nucleus of the cell. The nucleus of the cell is where all the genetic material is kept. So there's a lot of reasons why the mRNA vaccine is not going to cause cancer. Number one, mRNA doesn't turn into DNA, and our genome is DNA. All right, we're not going to take this RNA from the vaccine and incorporate it into our DNA. It's just not going to happen. All right, it's just not how our machinery works. All right, the mRNA also never enters the nucleus of the cell where our DNA is kept, so it never comes into contact with that. mRNA is also pretty fragile. It degrades pretty quickly, and it clears from our system in about 72 hours. And if it makes you feel any better, the cells which the vaccine affects, these dendritic cells, they don't live very long. All right, so even if there was something going on there, these cells are not going to live long enough for it to cause any issues. Okay, so these dendritic cells are sort of like the presenters of the immune system. They will take the mRNA, the mRNA can affect this, and they will turn out that antigen that will trigger immunity, and the dendritic cells are the ones that take this thing and go, here, rest of the immune system, this is the thing that we need to look out for. All right, these cells, they don't last long, so you don't have to worry about that. They will not last long enough to become a problem. So why does mixing these vaccines produce a better immune response? Now, different vaccine types stimulate different parts of the immune system. For example, the mRNA vaccines, like the Pfizer and the Moderna ones, are better at inducing an antibody response. Vector-based ones, like AstraZeneca, are better at triggering T-cell responses. So the different vaccines give the immune system multiple ways to recognize a pathogen or an enemy. So, it's like different angles on a mugshot. The police take mugshots of someone, they go from the front. They also go from the side. They also, have a lot of descriptions as well. How tall is the person? What are they wearing? What are, unique physical features? Any tattoos that you can look out for, etc. So these different vaccines, it's like giving the immune system different bits of information to recognize the same virus. So it can help your immune system recognize it better. Now, why do some people suffer from COVID-19 vaccination side effects? About half of the vaccinated people report reactions after the second dose. Now, whether one has side effects or not, the vaccines are still going to work. So it's not that, you don't have side effects means that the vaccine isn't working. Or you have a lot of side effects, meaning that the vaccine is working really well. It's not like that. All right, the side effects are from the immune system. So it's not because you're unhealthy either. It can make you feel terrible, but in a way, it's also sort of a good thing, because all it means is that your immune system is doing its thing. All right, and everyone's immune system is a little bit different. For example, someone's immune system might be like warriors, and they start yell when they go into battle, going like as they kill the enemy, right? And that yell means, you have a lot of these symptoms. But for other people, their immune system might be quiet, like a ninja. All right, they go in quietly like a ninja, but in the end, the enemy is still dealt with. All right, so get your vaccination and just let your immune system do its thing. So another question that people like to ask is, why do some people develop blood clots after the COVID-19 vaccination? Now, when we say blood clots, it's not just any blood clot. There's a certain condition that we're looking out for called vaccine-induced immune thrombotic thrombocytopenia, and it affects about 1 in 100,000 people who receive the vaccines. So to put that into perspective, in the United States, traffic fatality rate is about 12.4 deaths per 100,000 people. All right, so just one is a pretty low rate. So what happens with this clotting disorder is that antibodies are produced that bind to and activate platelets. Now, platelets are the component in your blood that like to clump together and cause the blood clots. So what these antibodies do is that they activate platelets, causing them to clump together and form a blood clot. And this is a problem because clots can clog up important vessels and damage organs. So what we know up to date is that it seems to occur mostly with the adenovirus vector vaccines. So ones like the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. But we still don't know why exactly this happens or what triggers it. It could be the adenovirus used in the vaccine. It could be the other components of the vaccine, but there's just not a lot of people who have come down with it. So because there's not a lot of people to come down with it, it can be pretty hard for researchers to, find a good population of people to study into it and to look into it. So there's still a lot of ongoing research to find out, what exactly is triggering it and if we can design a better treatment. So let's keep our eyes peeled about this. Now, why do we need boosters? So variants can make the vaccine less effective. Now, as a recap, vaccines train the immune system to fight the coronavirus, including producing antibodies that will help block the virus from getting inside cells. But what viruses do is that they will then, develop ways of getting around this. Okay, so it's like a cat and mouse game. We try to stop the virus from infecting us, and the virus tries to find ways to keep infecting us. So, you can think of this as just like how vaccines work against other diseases and how other diseases need a booster shot as well. It's just, trying to rev up your immune system again to just sort of bring those levels back up, bring that immunity level back up and just get back into the game. You can think of it as a little bit like an arms race. In the beginning, we have arrows and we are just shooting down the virus as it shows up. So the virus goes, okay, you know what? I'm going to show up with armor. So the virus shows up with armor. It's got a new variant. It's got an upgrade. It shows up with armor. So our arrows are less effective now. It still works, but it's not as well as before. And then we have an even new virus coming along. It's got even more armor. So our arrows don't work as well as they did before. So what a booster does is that it sort of revs it up. So, we are shooting out more arrows. We have more arrows to shoot at the virus, which means we have a better chance of one of the arrows working. It would be better if we have a new vaccine, like switching our arrows to armor-piercing rounds. But you know what? We will take what we can get. Now, the COVID data is always changing and getting updated. So we have to really keep an eye on this. Another thing we want to keep in mind is that no one knows that magic line, that magic antibody level known to give you the best amount of protection. So all we're doing right now is that we're looking at the data that we have from the real world. We're looking at the real world rates of vaccination and infection, and we're working our way from there. So why are there so many COVID-19 variants? So you can split viruses into two general types, DNA and RNA viruses. DNA viruses are ones that tend to be a little bit more stable, like the adenovirus or smallpox, something like that. RNA viruses are super unstable. Okay, they're things like hepatitis, the flu, SARS, measles, HIV, etc. They're super unstable and they mutate a lot. All right, so what happens when viruses replicate is that they aren't perfect. They make mistakes. Sort of like how if you were trying to replicate a document by hand, you're going to make mistakes too. These mistakes in their genome, they can have three effects, okay? They can have a detrimental effect, meaning that, these mutations make the virus not able to go on. Okay, that's good for us. Not good for the virus, good for us. They can be neutral, meaning that they don't have any effect, or they can be beneficial, like making them more contagious. Now, there is a selective pressure on the viruses to replicate faster and to spread more. So if you just look at the COVID variants, each variant is more contagious, better at infecting people, better at getting around our vaccine than the previous variants. All right, so right now it's Omicron that we're worried about, and it's really, really contagious, and it's even better at the previous versions at evading our vaccine. So it's like a cat and mouse game. We try to kill the virus tries to evade death by immune system, and by doing that, what happens is that the virus gets better and better and better at evading death. All right, so sometimes the viruses will just mutate themselves out of existence, but that's just not always the case. For example, SARS has just disappeared. We were really good at containing SARS. We had quick action, good contact tracing. Plus, it's also just the nature of the virus itself. People who got SARS, they got sick. They were easy to identify. We didn't have any asymptomatic people walking around with the virus. But since then, we haven't seen anyone infected with SARS from the wild. All right, now viruses regularly mutate themselves into extinction. For example, the flu virus. The flu virus regularly does that. New ones appear and they sort of take over the old ones. Every flu virus that has existed in humans until about 120 years ago has gone extinct. Even the strain that caused the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic is gone. So, will COVID-19 do that? Maybe, but we can't rely on them. So people will say that, maybe it will just burn itself out like previous viruses. But, even though previous viruses have done that, we don't have the evidence to show that, the viruses will always do that. We haven't been faced with something quite like this before. So we still have to take precautions and keep an eye out. We still have to keep an eye on it, still, do the research. But in the meantime, each of us, we have to take the steps to avoid getting infected. Because the more people that are infected, the more the virus can replicate. The more it replicates, the more mutations it gathers, and the more variants will happen. So each of us, we have to do our part and try to stop ourselves from getting infected. All right, so why don't kids get as sick from COVID-19 as adults? Now, there's a lot of different things feeding into this. Younger people, they tend to have stronger innate immunity, meaning that they have higher levels of interferon gamma and interleukin 17, which play important roles in innate immunity, as well as fewer specialized antibodies, which play roles in adaptive immunity. So it's like there's two branches of the immune system that's working together. Now, another way that children's immune systems can sort of protect them in a way is that they're less developed. And that's a good thing for them because it can cause less inflammation and less risk of something called the cytokine storm, which was a problem for a lot of people who got infected with COVID-19. Children are also less likely than adults to have comorbidities like being overweight or having diabetes, which increases the chance of severe COVID-19. But this isn't always the case, all right? We got lucky with COVID-19 because in the past, there were pandemics that hit young people harder than they hit the elderly. So why should we prepare to live with COVID-19? Now, COVID-19 has really established quite a firm foothold. Asymptomatic people can still spread the virus. Immunity levels vary among different individuals, and the immunity levels can wane over time. all of this can mean that the virus is really difficult to get rid of. So what we still have to do is that we still have to keep going on with all of our preventative measures. Unfortunately, masking, vaccination, exposure prevention, all of these things have somehow managed to become deeply political and controversial in a lot of places. If we don't control the infection rate and stop people from getting infected, more variants of concern could emerge. The elderly, toddlers, and the immunocompromised people, they can still get the virus and spread it. So what we really need to do is that we really need to continue on with our measures. And hopefully in the future, we will manage to control the COVID-19 pandemic to less dangerous levels, to a rate in which we don't have to worry about so many people potentially dying or coming up with severe side effects from this vaccine. And hopefully, as new data comes in, as we do further research, we'll find ways on how to emerge from this pandemic.
Now, we will be answering some questions from the audience. Please state your question in the live chat section. Kindly avoid asking questions about personal illnesses and ask each question only once. Thank you. Dr. Yi, for COVID patients, if they show minimal symptoms, does that mean that the virus has less effect on their body? Can they just treat it as a normal flu? Also, some people don't catch COVID-19 even though they come in close contact with their family members who are infected. Does that mean they have a stronger immune system?
All right, so the first question is minimal symptoms. Does it mean that the virus has less effect on their body? So what we're looking at now is that if they have minimal symptoms from COVID-19, there is some bodies of evidence to show that it does have less damage on their body. Obviously, people who have more severe disease is usually defined as people who have the virus affecting their different organs. For example, people who have the virus really ravaging their lungs or other organs and they need a lot of support, they will have more severe disease. So someone who has more mild disease, by definition, they just don't have that same damage going on in their internal organs. So this is a good sign. If they can manage to be less affected by the virus, if they can manage to, stave off the severe side effects of the virus, then it's pretty good. They can just stay at home. They don't need hospitalization. They can recover quite safely at home and just treat it a little bit like a normal flu. It's just the same things you would do with a flu. You would have to drink plenty of fluids. You would have to take a lot of rest at home, making sure you're getting adequate rest. And the next thing you want to do is try to protect the people around you and make sure that you're not accidentally spreading the virus around. So the good thing about this is that people who have more mild disease are typically also less likely to get the side effects that come with COVID-19. One of the things that we're really worried about and why it's really important for everyone to avoid infection is that we're seeing a lot of cases of something called long COVID. So when we're thinking of long COVID, a lot of people who catch COVID-19, they won't become severely ill, but they do end up with these long-term complications of COVID-19. So a lot of these long-term complications can be things like extreme tiredness, shortness of breath, heart palpitations, a brain fog. It can be changes to their taste and smell, joint pain, difficulty sleeping, tinnitus, diarrhea, nausea, cough, headaches, rashes, just more than 200 symptoms that people have reported as a result of long COVID. So one of the things we have noticed about this is that when it comes to long COVID, one of the things we know is that people who have more severe disease tend to increase the risk of coming down with all of these complications. People with severe disease can also end up damaging the organs as well and having to deal with this damage in the long term. But that doesn't mean that a mild disease means that you will definitely not get long COVID. All that means is that you lower your risk of getting it. Right? So one of the main ways to protect yourself and to protect yourself against all of these side effects of COVID is to be vaccinated. Vaccination does protect against, number one, getting the disease to begin with. It protects against severe disease, and it also helps protect against long COVID. People who are vaccinated have a lower risk of getting these complications because, number one, they have a lower risk of catching the disease to begin with. But even if they do catch the disease, they will tend to have a very mild disease. Now, research has looked into comparing, people who have a mild disease and people who have mild disease but are vaccinated. All right, so even if you catch COVID-19, the vaccination will still protect you against these effects of long COVID. All right, it will reduce your risk of getting it. And that is one of the things that we also really, really want to look out for, because right now it's still pretty new. We still don't know what is causing long COVID. We still don't know what are the long-term effects of long COVID. There's a lot of experts saying that long COVID is going to be one of our major health problems in the years to come, because so many people have been infected by COVID-19 and so many people are now suffering from these complications. So as part of protecting ourselves against COVID, number one, you want to stop yourself from getting the disease to begin with, all right? And that is vaccination. Number two, you do want to protect yourself against getting severe disease to begin with, okay? So one of the things that will protect us against severe disease is being vaccinated. And another thing is just being generally healthier. All right, so a lot of people who get severe COVID-19, they tend to be a little bit more unhealthy. They tend to have those comorbidities, like they're overweight or obese. They have heart disease, they have kidney disease, they have diabetes, they have other health issues going on. Their body isn't in the best place to start fighting off that disease. All right, so you want to take care of yourself. You want to, take care of your immune system so that your immune system can hopefully deal with this virus before it becomes a problem. And this sort of feeds into our next question. Now, why do some people catch COVID-19 even though they're in close contact with their family members who got the virus? Now, one of the things we have noticed about COVID-19 is that you just look at the people who catch it. I know a few people who have family members who caught COVID, but they themselves managed to avoid getting infected. So there's a lot of reasons for this. And one of the reasons I mentioned just now is that, maybe their immune system is just better off at fighting off that disease to begin with. It all depends on if your immune system is robust enough. Because when you first get infected with a virus, there's only a few viruses that manage to make its way into your system. Okay, what happens then is that, your body has that window of time to eliminate that virus, to just get rid of it so that you don't get sick. All right, that's part of what the vaccines are trying to do. They're trying to give your immune system that, that boost to make sure that it can just eliminate that virus in the early stages when there's still a reasonable number for it to deal with. All right, so if you have a strong immune system, there's a chance that, when you are first exposed to this virus, your immune system is just going to get rid of it before it has a chance to replicate and cause a problem. Now, another reason why people just never seem to get infected is just luck. Some people are just really, really lucky and they just never get it. Some researchers are saying it's because it's genetic. It's just how they are. They are just naturally resistant. It's sort of like a zombie apocalypse movie, every zombie apocalypse movie, there's always that naturally resistant person, same thing here. There's just some people out there who are just resistant to COVID-19. It's just in their genes. Now, other experts are saying it's because they have higher levels of T cells from other coronavirus infections like the common cold, which will give them this level of protection. So if you have been exposed to similar viruses before, like similar coronaviruses like the common cold, remember your immune system forms a memory. So what your immune system does is that it remembers every enemy it has encountered before. And And for some researchers, they believe that, oh, your immune system has recognized similar viruses. So it's sort of like it sort of recognizes the the COVID-19 virus as well. So your immune system sort of goes, you know what, you look sort of familiar. So they sort of launch an attack as well, and that can help you get rid of it. Another reason is that they might have stronger mucosal immunity, which is the immune system at your mucous membranes. It's like the mucous membranes lining the inside of your nose, where you can be first exposed to the COVID-19 virus. So they might just have stronger immunity levels at that barrier there. That's also why scientists are trying to develop a sort of nasal spray or a nasal vaccine to get rid of the virus that way, because they feel like it's a better method, trying to target the virus at the site it enters the body, rather than waiting for the virus to get into you already and then for that immune system to kick into gear. They're trying to stop it at the barrier there. All right, so there's a lot of things feeding into it. The other thing is that they might just be really good at avoiding it. They might be really good at hand hygiene, at all of these preventative measures. Or they might have just been exposed to a much smaller amount of the virus, which gives the immune system a really good chance of just eliminating it. Because just think about it, if you're exposed to maybe, 500 viruses, you can get rid of it. If you're exposed to like 5 million viruses, just as an example, you're going to have a tough time there. Right? And then lastly, some people may have gotten it and they were just asymptomatic and just never knew.
Dr. EE, what is the cause of long COVID? Is it due to the COVID-19 virus remaining in the body? Also, what is the difference between the damage caused by Delta and Omicron in terms of long COVID?
All right, so when you're looking at long COVID, a lot of people who will get the long COVID, people don't know what causes it. All right, so even asymptomatic people can end up getting long COVID symptoms, or even those with super mild COVID can still end up with this sort of damage going on. So long COVID is so complex. It affects so many different body systems. It can affect your brain, it can affect your lungs, your heart, other organs. It can even cause very vague symptoms, like just feeling tired all the time, feeling a lot of brain fog. It can even change your sense of taste and smell. It can cause joint pain, difficulty sleeping, tinnitus. It can cause issues with their digestive system, cause issues with their skin, rashes, all sorts of things. Every part of the body seems to be affected. So it's so complex, and we still don't know what exactly is causing it. But researchers are thinking that it's very unlikely that is one single thing causing all of these symptoms going on. So some researchers are looking into nerve damage. Some researchers are saying, oh, it's because of damage to the nerves, which are causing a lot of these symptoms, because nerves, they feed into every part of your body, and if you damage them, they can cause a lot of weird symptoms. Other researchers are saying, you know what, maybe it's tiny clots that are causing the problems, but we still don't really know. What we do know is that it's not so much the variant of the virus, but it's more to come down with if the infection is severe or not, or if someone is vaccinated or not. These seem to be more strongly correlated to the risk of long COVID. So like I mentioned before, someone who has very severe disease might end up with a higher chance of having long COVID. And in that time period, when that virus is ravaging their body, and they might end up with organ damage, such as lung damage or even heart damage. So people with mild disease, they tend to just sort of escape with less serious consequences. But even asymptomatic people, they might end up with some sort of symptoms, 6 months on or even longer. right? So the only way to protect against long COVID is to never be infected by COVID-19 to begin with. So one of the things about COVID-19 is that, you really, really want to avoid it because we don't want to end up with these long-term problems down the line. A lot of people think of COVID-19 as just the flu, like one and done. You get the flu, you recover, and you're fine. But as it turns out, for a lot of people, they're not fine. They catch COVID-19. They recover from it in the sense that the virus is no longer present in their body. They have recovered from the disease, but they are still dealing with these long-term consequences. They're still suffering from symptoms months after they have initially recovered from the infection. So it is something that we want to keep an eye out for. Another thing is that children are susceptible to long COVID. It is not something that only affects adults or only affects people who are not very healthy. Children can get long COVID. And for children, they can still end up with symptoms like fatigue, cough, headache, muscle aches, or even the loss of taste and smell after falling ill with COVID-19. But it's still not very clear from the data we have now, how many children are affected, what is the risk of children to get long COVID if they're infected with COVID-19. So it's still one of those areas that we want to keep an eye on. We still don't know a lot about what is causing it and what we can do to help people who have it. So it is an area of further research.
Dr. Yi, will there be any long-term effects on the health and organs of children and adults who are vaccinated but have mild symptoms of COVID-19? Also, how long do patients stay contagious after recovering from COVID-19?
So when it comes to these long-term effects, it is just what I was talking about just now. It is all of this long-term, this long COVID. Even someone who is vaccinated with a mild COVID, they still have a chance of getting long COVID. But being vaccinated will decrease your chances of getting it. That's all the more reason to get vaccinated. It protects you against severe disease and protects you against long COVID. All right, so being vaccinated does decrease your risk for everyone, adults and children. But remember, it is an area of ongoing research. The numbers are always changing. Even now, they still don't have, firm numbers to predict, how many children out there are coming down with long COVID? How long is this going to last? What is all of this is still changing as we get more data, as we do more research. So we still have to keep an eye on this. As for people who are contagious, after they have recovered from COVID-19, they should no longer be contagious because the virus should be cleared from their body.
Dr. Yi, what can cause high blood creatine levels? Would you please share some diet tips or lifestyle changes for protecting kidney health and managing creatinine levels naturally?
All right, so when it comes to high creatine levels, one of the main reasons for higher creatine levels is dehydration. That's pretty much the number one issue for a lot of people with these sort of, every time you go to the doctor, you get a blood test. And one of the things they always check for is your kidney function test. The number one reason why the kidney function test or the numbers might be a little weird there is dehydration. All right, so if it's not dehydration, then we have to dig a little bit deeper and see, what other numbers are going on there. What are the other potential issues going on? Another really common cause of kidney issues is things like high blood pressure. Now, people have this image in their head thinking of, high blood pressure, it has to do with the heart, right? High blood pressure affects every organ in your body, and your kidneys are ones that are especially sensitive. All right, your kidneys are these super sensitive little organs, and this is why every little thing tends to send your kidney function test a little bit wonky. All right, so high blood pressure, especially if it's really high over a longer period of time, it can damage your kidneys and lead to these sort of off kidney function tests. Now, the other things you want to look at is that how are these levels looking in comparison to the other blood tests? Rarely do we look at one blood test in particular. We always want to keep in mind, how does this relate to the other numbers in your blood test? Does it increase or rise in conjunction with the other numbers? What are the other numbers showing as well? So it's not just one number that we have to focus on. It is the entire number, because all of the numbers there, they paint a better picture. All right, so if you're looking at your kidneys, there are certain stages of kidney failure, stage 1, stage 5, and then you have like acute kidney injury, or AKI. There are also different stages as well. So one of the things that I always like to tell patients is that the best way to take care of your kidneys is to drink a lot of water. Okay, a lot of people, just like normal, otherwise healthy people, they will put themselves into acute kidney injury, stage 1, just the earliest stages of acute kidney injury, because they're dehydrated. Okay, so when I was working in the hospital, I used to joke with my colleagues saying that, we're probably all in acute kidney injury stage 1 because we're all dehydrated. All right, so just dehydration is enough for your kidneys to start complaining. So the number one way to fix all of these values is to drink plenty of water. All right, we want to drink a lot of water, because when you drink the water, what happens then is that your kidneys will have a lot of material to work with. When your kidneys are dehydrated, what happens then is that all of the things that it should be getting rid of, it starts holding on to, because your body will deem you holding on to water more important than your kidney getting rid of these toxins. All right, so all of these toxins start building up in your kidneys and in your body, and your kidneys, they're fragile little things. They will start complaining, and that's what you start seeing on your blood test. So you want to drink a lot of water, because that makes sure that all of these toxins are flushed out of your system. So a very general rule for drinking enough water is to drink enough water until your pee is very, very clear and light in color. All right, so for every person, that amount of water will be a little bit different, because we all have different bodies. We all have different levels of activity, but that's just a very general rule. The next thing to take care of your kidneys is to take care of your blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure, it's not just your heart you're looking after, it's also your kidneys. Okay, one of the major causes of kidney failure or chronic kidney disease is high blood pressure. So it's one of those things you really want to keep an eye on. The other things are just other diseases that you also want to keep an eye on. Like I mentioned before, your kidneys are fragile. Everything affects your kidneys, all right? So if you've got diabetes, you really need to keep that diabetes under control. You have any other health conditions, you really got to keep those health conditions under control, because your body works as a system altogether. Right? So when it comes to food, you do want to eat a lot of plant foods. You do want to keep eating healthy, right? Because your kidneys are one of the main organs in your body that help get rid of all of these toxins. Okay, so if you're eating unhealthy, your kidneys have to work really hard to help clear your body of all the things you're shoving into it. Okay, and by eating healthy, you're also taking care of the health of your other organs as well. Because quite often, when one organ starts failing, your kidneys will start going off too. Okay, because they're just super fragile like that. You get heart disease, your kidneys can start going off. You have lung disease, your kidneys start going. Everything goes wrong in your body, even things that are even things that you wouldn't think are initially connected to your kidneys will start going off. It's one of those organs, okay? So you want to eat super healthy, just to make sure that your other organs stay super healthy as well.
Dr. Yi, what is maltodextrin, and is it safe for diabetics?
So maltodextrin is a starch, basically. Now, a lot of people will think that, it's not something that is good for diabetics because it has a word dextrin in it, or they seem like, oh, it is a form of starch. Or some people have this misconception that is used as a type of sweetener. But for a lot of the things, maltodextrin is a flavorless starch that is used as it's used in a lot of products to help improve the texture or to help improve a lot of these physical qualities of the product. All right, so for diabetics, it's not just looking at things like maltodextrin or other things. You got to look at the food as a whole. Maltodextrin in and of itself is pretty safe for people to eat. All right, but if you have, maltodextrin in, I don't know, sugary, creamy crackers, that's not going to be healthy for you. It's got nothing to do with the maltodextrin. All right. So when you're looking at food, what a lot of people tend to do is that they hyper focus on one thing in the food when you should be looking at it as a whole. So especially with diabetics, what a lot of people with diabetics tend to do is that they hyper focus on things like sugars, or things that they think are sugars, like maltodextrin. And they will think to themselves, you know what, I have to avoid everything with any sort of sugar or any sort of sweet in it. But that's not the case. With diabetics, it's just a general healthy eating. All right, we want to look at foods that have a low glycemic index. A low glycemic index is a food that helps your blood sugar go up gently. All right, foods with a high glycemic index are foods that make your blood sugar go up and down super sharply, those spikes in your blood sugar. That's what we don't want. All right, and your glycemic index has nothing to do with the sugar or how sweet a food is. All right, there's a lot of sugars out there that actually have a low glycemic index. Okay, so that's what you want to look for. But if you're not sure, if you don't feel like looking up the glycemic index of all sorts of different foods, what you can do instead is that you want to go for the foods that have a lot of fiber. All right, foods that have a lot of fiber, they tend to have a low glycemic index. All right, and fiber also helps temper that increase in blood sugar. So if you just can't help it anymore and you just want to indulge yourself and have a bite of cake for your birthday, all right, you can do that and then have a lot of fiber at the same time. That can help temper that rise in blood sugar. So it's not just for diabetics, it's for everyone out there. We don't want to just hyper focus on one thing in the food. All right, you got to look at it as a whole. Okay, so for example, there's a lot of foods out there. Like if you look at cocaine, cocaine has, vitamin A. Cocaine has vitamins in it. It's also used in a lot of medical procedures, but that doesn't mean it's good for you. But for example, if you focus on one thing, it's going to look like it's good when in reality it's not. It's the same thing with foods. If you look at one thing in the food, and you have this impression of it being bad, then, you are not looking at you're missing out on so many different things in there. For example, if you look at an apple and you're only focusing on, an apple has fruit sugar in it, therefore I can't eat it, right? You're missing out on all of the other nutrients that an apple has to offer for you. So it's all about looking at it as a whole and seeing your diet as a whole as well. How is this going to fit into my diet? Is this food going to cover areas that I'm not covering with the other foods that are part of my diet? Does it work together in harmony with the other foods? Is it going to help my body as a whole? These are the sort of questions we want to be asking ourselves.
Dr. EE, why do some people have eczema when they get older, even though they didn't have any signs of it when they were younger?
All right, so eczema and all of these sort of immune related conditions, these are the ones that are a little bit weird. Okay, for these sort of diseases, a lot of the times children end up with eczema. They can end up with really bad eczema, and then as they grow up, it just sort of disappears. All right, but for other people, it's the other way around. As children, they don't have any eczema, and then as they grow up, suddenly they start getting flares of eczema. Now, assuming it is eczema and it's not some other skin condition, now what happens with these immune-related conditions or these autoimmune conditions is what happens then is that a lot of the times these conditions can appear in adulthood. Your immune system was going along just fine, and then all of a sudden it was sensitized to something. There's a lot of common sensitizers out there. For example, chemicals, pollutants out there. There's a lot of viral infections that can kickstart an immune condition. All right, so if you have it as an adult, what probably happened then is that your immune system was sensitized to something, and that has triggered it to start attacking the cells in your skin, or even it's not even in your skin, any other immune condition out there can start attacking other areas of the body. Now, it's quite common for these immune conditions to happen in adulthood because when you're a kid, you're not exposed to that many things to begin with, all right? So as you get older, as you become adult, you're exposed to a lot more things. You go out into the world and you're exposed to a lot more things. And if you're unlucky, you can just pick up something out there. It's really difficult to pinpoint what exactly is triggering it. And a lot of scientists and researchers, we don't know what exactly can trigger it either. There's a lot of things that may be able to trigger it, but it's not to say that it's always that case for every person. So it's not just eczema. There's a lot of conditions that can cause, itchy, flaky skin, all of these allergic immune conditions, or all of these autoimmune conditions. It can be triggered in adulthood, but unfortunately, we won't be able to tell you what exactly that trigger is.
Due to time constraints, the next question will be our last question. Dr. EE, are HIIT workouts suitable for hypothyroidism patients? Do HIIT or HIIT workouts cause the increase of cortisol levels and affect hypothyroidism patients?
Okay, so people with hypothyroidism meaning, for people who don't know, that means that they have low levels of thyroid hormones. Now, these low levels of thyroid hormones can cause a lot of distressing symptoms. For example, hair loss. It can cause a weight gain. It can cause extreme tiredness. It can cause constipation. All sorts of these unpleasant side effects. But assuming that the hypothyroidism is controlled with medications and they have an appropriate level of thyroid hormones, it's actually encouraged for people to go exercise, whether they have hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. Right, it's encouraged for everyone with any sort of thyroid disease to exercise, right? Because one of the things with hypothyroidism is that, because their body is just slow, it's just slower. All right, that's what hypothyroidism does to you. You feel really slow, you feel really fatigued, your metabolism slows down, and because you feel really fatigued, you don't feel like exercising very much. Because your metabolism slows down, you need less calories than before to maintain, your normal bodily functions. And what this means is that it's really easy for people with hypothyroidism to gain weight. All right, so one of the things we do encourage people with hypothyroidism to do is exercise. Now, if you're doing HIIT exercises, it's still okay. You can do HIIT exercises. In fact, I applaud you for managing to do HIIT exercises if you have hypothyroidism. It's really tough to do even when you're healthy. And when you have a condition like hypothyroidism, making you feel not at your best self, and you're still going for these sort of exercises, that's pretty amazing. All right, so please continue exercising, continue managing your thyroid condition. Make sure your thyroid condition is well managed and you have appropriate levels of thyroid hormones in your body, and just continue on with your exercise. All right, now exercise of any sort will increase your heart rate. It will increase your blood pressure. It can increase the stress levels in your body, but that's only as a temporary result. And this is an appropriate use of this higher blood pressure, an appropriate use of all of these hormones coursing through you. What we're really worried about with the stress hormones is inappropriate use of it. For example, you're sitting at your desk. Your boss is yelling at you, and you feel your deadlines coming up. You feel that stress coming on. That's inappropriate release of the stress hormones, okay? That's what we don't want, because what happens then is that your body is kicked into that fight or flight, and you don't have the other things going around about it that will actually make it appropriate. There's nothing for you to flee from. Are you going to run from your computer? No. There's nothing for you to fight against. So that's inappropriate use. But once you're getting your body moving around, once you're getting everything moving, then yeah, you want your blood vessels to increase. You want your heart to pump faster. You want your blood pressure to go up a little bit and your vessels to dilate and deliver all of these nutrients and oxygen around your body. That's a good thing. All right. That is what is supposed to be happening. So it's not something that you have to avoid. So when it comes to hypothyroidism patients, please exercise more. If it's not HIIT, you don't have to do HIIT if that's not for you, which I completely understand, but just exercise. Any sort of exercise is fine. Just pick the exercise that is most suitable for you and please keep going with it.
Thank you, Dr. Yi, for taking your time to educate us regarding health today.
Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time out of your Saturday morning to listen to my talk. I'm so grateful that even after all this time, you all are still sticking with me. So thank you so much. I hope it was both informative and entertaining.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. This video will be accessible until March 16th, 9 a.m. Take care and stay safe. Goodbye.